Dumelang Sanibonani, welcome back to the Real Streetwise Financial Talk. Once again, this is your boy Calvin, your Stratman investor. And thank you guys for joining me once again. So today we continue with the second part of our two-part topic. If you remember last week, we spoke about the different types of credit, and I said that this was all building up towards us actually understanding how to pay off our home loan within 5 to 7 years. So today's topic is going to be very exciting for you guys. I promise you, you're going to love it. It's going to teach you quite a lot, and I guarantee if you take advantage of this, your life will change. So as always, just to get some admin out the way, this channel is sponsored by Click, guys. Please follow the link, check them out, look at their website. I promise you, exciting company, doing exciting things, and I bet you probably want to be part of it as well. And just another thing to note, please note that I am not a financial advisor, I'm not a certified financial planner, I'm not an attorney. I'm just a guy who's teaching you things that I've gone through, what I've learned, the mistakes that I've made, making sure that you don't make those same mistakes. So, getting straight into it. Yes, as mentioned, last week we spoke about the different types of credit. And it's very important that you understand the contents of part one, because they're going to be very key to understand what is it I'm going to take you through today. Because first of all, if you remember, we took you through the different types of credit, and we said that we said that credit could be categorized into three main parts, being your installment credit, being your revolving credit, and your credit accounts. And we went through the different types of interest, your compound interest and your simple interest, and we took you through how they apply to the various types of credit. So it's very key that you understand that. So I'd urge that you go back to the episode and just revisit it, just to revise yourself with certain concepts. So today we're going to continue. So just before we dive deeper into today's topic, let's actually run through a summary of what we went through in the previous episode, because it's going to be very key, as I say once again, for you to understand those elements. If you remember, we had an illustrative example, and we said that let's assume that we've got a bond granted to us of 1 million at 10% for 20 years, right? And we said that let's assume our monthly payment is 10,000 Rand, 10K per month, right? So the one thing that I told you was that you need to understand and know that this 10K per month is actually made up of two components, right? It's made up of interest and principal component, right? And that's pretty much with every single installment that you're gonna make. There's two components of every installment of Patalayo. There's the principal and there's the interest, right? And then we further took a step further and said, let's actually break down how this thing is applied, especially when it comes to installment credit, because we specifically looking at home loans. So, and we said that home loan is an installment credit. So now we're taking a step further. Remember, we spoke about amortization, right? And we said the concept of amortization applies to installment credit because it's amortized over the life of the facility, right? So now I explained what an amortization is, but just to take you through that again, let's take you through a graph that can help you understand what amortization is. So think of this graph as your amortization schedule, right? We said that, let's assume that we've got a 20-year bond. So this line here is your payment. This side represents your payment, and this represents your time. Right? And sit here, let's assume again it's a 20-year bond. So this would be day one or year zero. This would be more or less midpoint, so year 10, and this would be year 20, right? This is your 20-year bond. That's what this graph represents. And it's here that, let's say that this line here represents your interest payment, right? And that this line here, this curve here, represents your principal, if you remember, right? So let's just use a different pen, call this interest, and call this principal, right? And now, what I wanted you to know is that kule installment is 10,000 that you're paying every single month, right? I kid you not, the split, especially for the first part, remember we said that this represents midpoint. This here is your year 10, midpoint, more or less. And then we say that if we are paying 10,000 Rand per month, right? I kid you not, The split is as follows, especially for the first part of the facility. You pay plus minus 9,000 Rand here in interest, and you're paying plus minus 1,000 Rand in principal. So 9,000 Rand in interest, 1,000 Rand in principal makes up the 10,000 Rand. The 10,000 Rand installment. Remember, it's interest and component. So in short, what I'm trying to say is that the first part of facility, the first 10 years more or less, you pretty much servicing the interest, right? You're pretty much servicing the interest. And yes, it changes on the second part, the next 10 years or the last 10 years, and the inverse then happens, where your principal then starts gaining momentum and it starts being the bigger component. So make that 9K, and your interest starts losing momentum, that then becomes your 1,000 Rand, right? And this part here, what I wanted you to know is that this part here, the first 10 years, is basically your bank profit, right? So what I'm saying is, the bank pretty much makes their profit in the first 10 years of your bond, right? If you had to do this, what you call your credit cost multiple, if you had to look at your credit cost multiple over the life of your facility, for a bond, it can go as high as 2.1 or something crazy like that. What that essentially means is that in a 20-year period, the bank can buy about more than two, or with the money that you would have paid the bank, the cash flow that you would have actually paid the bank, you could have afforded to buy yourself at least 2 houses, right? And the bank makes its profit within the first 10 years of the life of the facility, because that's where most of the interest is accumulated, right? So this represents your amortization, guys, right? And remember, we said another thing is that chances are, more times than not, right, at this point, at year 10, you're going to get a bank, Mr. Calvin, well done. You've been a great customer or great client to us. You've been paying on time. We would like to afford you a restructure on your facility, right? We would like to either drop your interest rate or just drop the repayment that you're making. And we restructure that, and you're now paying, let's say now you're paying 9,000 Rand, right? And I mean, you're saving 1,000 Rand, and that's a lot of money, especially in today's times. A lot of people don't have jobs. A lot of people have been forced to take pay cuts. 1,000 Rand can go a long way. So if a bank comes to you and affords you the restructure of 9,000 Rand, you take it. You gladly take it. But what you don't realize and what they don't tell you is that you effectively resetting the clock back. So effectively, you putting yourself through the same process that you just went through for the past 10 years. Right. So be very careful in taking restructures or agreeing to any restructures unless you really understand this concept, right? So good, happiness. So now, based on this concept, going back to this same example, let's assume now we're at year 10. So again, year 10. Yeah? So we're assuming we're at year 10. So I want to show you more or less what would have, or the situation and the position that you'd be sitting at year 10, assuming you wanted to settle your bond. So interest at year 10 would more or less be 9,000 Rand times 120, because 10 years represents 120 months, is 1080. That represents interest. That's how much interest you've paid over the past 10 years, right? How much of principal have you paid? You paid 1,000 Rand times 120 equals 120,000, right? Meaning the total cash flow from your bank, the total cash outflow that you've had to pay is actually 100, or rather 1.2 million. So in 10 years, you've paid 102 million. But again, how much of that has actually gone towards reducing your bond? It's only this amount here. 120, right? So, in other words, guys, if on this day you go to the bank and you say, guys, I would please like to get a settlement amount, I would like to settle my bond, you more or less going to settle it at, so it's probably going to be 1 million minus 120,000. So settlement amount at this point will probably be 880. So kid you not, this is reality. You, for the past 10 years, have been consistently paying the bank 10,000 Rand every single month for the past 120 months, right? You've paid a total of 1.2 million, but your bond has only actually reduced by 120,000. So, question is that fair, right? Is that fair that you've been paying basically half of this thing's life, but you've only reduced it by 120, right? Meaning that pretty much you haven't done anything, you haven't even reached halfway of this bond's life, right? So whether or not that's fair is dependent on whether or not you want to learn a quicker way for you to squash this and settle this, right? And that's what I'm going to be taking you through today. So the concept that I'm going to be taking you through today, guys, number one, I need to be honest, I did not invent this. I did not create this. It's been around for a while. I just stumbled across it because, like I say, I've been learning this game, I've been pushing the boundaries, and I've been in the property space for a while now. So, and if you can learn this, I mean, it's not the only technique or methodology that's out there for you to settle your bond quicker, but for me, it's the one technique that is most effective, especially if you don't have a lot of cash flow to throw around, if you don't have a lot of excess cash flow to throw around, and you also don't want to change your lifestyle too much. And we're talking about a person learner who's already saving, not a lot, but saving something, but at the same time doesn't want to change the fact that they're living a certain lifestyle. They don't want to change and all of that. So this methodology or this technique is called velocity banking. Benefits of this technique, right, which for me makes this technique, head above heels over every other technique that I've come across, is number one, this gives you more or less a 66% saving in interest, right? So when I say that, so think of this element here. Remember, for the first part, we're pretty much paying interest for the first 10 years, and we said that this interest will more or less be 10.8. So we're using this concept, it will allow you to save at least 66% of that. The other thing it will allow you to do is save 66% in time. Right, so meaning you will literally cut down the time that you would have spent on this thing by almost 66% or more actually. The other thing, do all of this with maintaining the same expenses, meaning no change in your expenses, maintaining the same income. And last but not least, especially for people who are within the property space, who are investors, this becomes very key because it plays to our advantage where it helps you massively improve your credit score. Now, before I actually take you through how we'll actually apply this in this real life scenario, I want to show you what the main difference between these two types of credit is. So remember we said that we have installment credit and we've got revolving credit. So the main difference between these two types of credit is that, first of all, with installment credit, right, interest is compounded. Remember we said that interest is compounded, and interest under revolving credit is simple, right? That's the first thing. That's the first main distinction between the two, right? The other distinction is under installment credit, right? There's a concept of close-ended. So installment credit is close-ended, whereas revolving credit is open-ended. And what does that mean? So easy. So let's assume this is your facility that you're paying towards. Yeah? You're paying towards this facility, right? With an installment credit, that 10,000 Rand, right? The 10K that you're paying. Once you pay that, you can't get it back, right? And we're assuming here there's no flexi reserve. We're assuming that you're paying this over the life of the instrument, which is 20 years, and you're paying 10,000 Rand. You're not making any extra payments, right? That 10K, when you pay it into this facility, you can't get it back. So in other words, you can't pay 10,000 today and then go to the bank tomorrow and say, hey, can I please get access to that 10,000 that I paid? It's in. Hamid, right? So that's what it means by saying, that's what I mean by saying it's close-ended. You pay it in and you can't get it back. It's a one-way traffic, right? With open-ended, on the other hand, that 10K that you may be paying to that facility, you can get it back. Meaning that you can pay tomorrow, you can use today, pay tomorrow, and make use of it again. So it revolves, hence the concept of revolving credit. So it's open-ended. You can pay, use. That's the main difference between those two. And the final difference is that we said, remember we said, under installment credits, It's an amortized instrument. So interest is determined over the amortized period. It's compounded, it's amortized, right? But under revolving credit, we said that there is a concept of average daily balance. Average daily balance, right? Those are the main differences between the two, right? And if you can remember with average daily balance, we said that the interest is determined on a daily basis. Every single day, interest is calculated. So for instance, let's assume the balance that you owe today is 20,000, right? 20K. So how they'll determine the interest for today is I'll say 20K times 21%. Let's assume a credit card is at 21%. And then they'll divide that by 365 days to represent the days, right? So meaning they'll get an interest figure for today. And let's assume tomorrow of the 20,000 you pay 10K, right? That means your balance is now 10. So the interest for tomorrow will then be based on the 10,000, not on the 20. So they'll then say 10,000 times by 21 divided by 365. And they'll do that every single day for the 30 days of the month. And then at the end of the month, they'll accumulate those two, right? Give you another illustrative example. For instance, under installment credit, right? The curve or the graph, the line is like this. It's straight, right? This is the start of the month, and this is the end of the month, right? End, right? So what this means is that interest under an amortized instrument is determined on day one. Meaning that when you get given a bond, if you get given this 1 million today, right? The interest is determined upfront. Why? Because they already know how long you're going to be in this thing for. They know that you're going to be in this thing for 20 years, right? And we've given you the money. We know all the inputs, the various inputs. We know what the interest is. We know what the term is. We know what the frequency is. We know what the tenor is. We know all those elements. And because we know those elements, we can determine interest up front. So then if you look at your amortization schedule, it has your balance, the opening balance up front, and then you calculate interest on the opening balance. But that interest will be paid at the end. I understand. So, and the main difference between that and revolving credit is that revolving credit differs slightly. So revolving credit has this relationship. It goes up, down, up, down, up, down, right? So it changes, it fluctuates over the month, right? So do you agree with me then that with an installment, with a revolving credit, they don't really know to do it for how long they're doing it. All they've done is that they've made the facility available to you. You can decide to use 10,000 today, pay tomorrow, use 1,000 tomorrow. You can decide how you're going to do it. So as a result, they can't determine the interest up front. So they can only determine the interest at the close of whatever at the balance is, whatever the balance is at the close of that day. So we'll say today the balance is 20,000, is calculate interest on that. Tomorrow it's 10,000, calculate interest on that, and it varies. Hence, and then what they'll do is they'll accumulate all those daily balances, and then you'll pay the interest at the end. That's the main difference. Understand that, I promise you, your life becomes much easier. So now, all of this then comes into how we actually pay off this bond quicker, right? And to show you that, I'm going to take you through this example. Now, we've got here your bond, your mortgage bond, and we've got here your credit card. Now, guys, it doesn't have to be credit card. I'm just using credit card as for example purposes. It can be any revolving credit. You've got an overdraft that you can use. You've got a revolving personal loan. Any revolving credit can literally be used for this purpose, as well as this side. Any revolving, or rather any installment credit can be used as a bond for the bond section. So we said that we have a mortgage of $1 million in it. So on day one, this is D1. So make this D1. On day one, our mortgage is at 1 million. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is our balance on day one, right? And then let's assume that on day one, we also have a credit limit on our credit card of 50,000 Rand. So we haven't yet used this. This is available for us to use, but we haven't touched it yet, right? So the question I have for you is that on day one, what is my total exposure? In other words, if on day one, I'm saying I want to settle all the credit that I have, right? And let's assume this is the only credit I have. What is my exposure? How much will I settle? I will settle $1 million, right? It won't be 1,050,000 because I haven't touched this 50. This 50 is available for me to use, but I haven't used it. So I'll only start incurring the interest and only start paying it once it's used. So remember that, because it's going to be very key, right? So That's day one. Now, what velocity banking then says is that take this 50 and chuck it into your credit card. So 50. So meaning your credit card reduces on day one, this is still day one, it reduces by 50,000, meaning that it's now sitting on 950. Remember guys, this 50 doesn't go towards your interest, right? Because your interest will be determined over the amortized period. You've done this on day one. So anything that you pay over and above the interest goes towards your principal with your amortized instruments, right? So day one, your bond gets reduced by 50,000 rand, right? But now hold on, I've now taken 50,000 rand from a credit card and I've chucked it into this, meaning that I now owe 50,000 rand on a credit card. So now I then have a balance on my credit card of 50,000 rand. So let's say balance. So now this is no longer a limit, it's a balance, right? But now, you're probably asking yourself, okay, Kelvin, I've just put myself into more debt, 50,000 rand, right? Why would I do that? That's stupid. I'm saying, no, you haven't put yourself into more debt. Remember, I said you had a total exposure of 1 million on day one, right? Because you hadn't touched this. Day two, you're now sitting at an exposure of 950 on your bond and 50 on your credit card. Do you realize that you're still sitting at an exposure of 1 million? So nothing has changed. The only thing is that now you split the million into two facilities, right? And yes, I know what you're thinking, this is more expensive, but no, remember I told you the concept between compound interest and simple interest, that you can't just assume just because it's a 21% interest on a credit card that it's more expensive. You need to understand the different types. And we are saying here that credit card is simple interest, right? So you're still sitting on an exposure of 50, right? So I'm saying that in day one, you've reduced your bond by 50,000 rand. Now think back, how long would it have taken you to reduce it by 50,000 rand under the traditional way of pay, right? Because in 10 years, you've only reduced it by 120,000, right? So now, okay, cool. Now, let's talk about how we're going to handle this credit card. So I'm saying that with this credit card, I'm going to assume that you earn a net of 30,000 rand a month. I know obviously it differs, but this for illustrative purposes, you're earning 30,000 rand a month on that's your income that you're generating every single month. I'm then saying take your entire salary, you chuck it into here, 30k, right? So meaning that the balance on your credit card reduces to what? To 20,000. That's a new balance. So you now owe 20,000 on your credit card because what? Because why? You've thrown your entire salary in here, right? And remember, average daily balance, and they can only charge you interest on the 20,000, not the 50, right? But now, Calvin, you've just asked me to put my salary into this thing, and I've got a life. I've got kids, school fees that I need to pay. I've got groceries, food that I need to buy. I've got rent. I've got a bond that I need to pay. I've got all these expenses that I've been incurring in my life, and I've got savings. Let's assume you're saving 6,000 rand. I'm saying that's not a problem. All I'm saying is that all those expenses, they now come off your credit card. So let's assume you've got a car that you're paying, and that car is 5,000 rand. You're going to pay it from your credit card or your overdraft or whatever credit line of credit that you're using. So car. Another thing, food. You've got food that you need to eat, that you need to make groceries. Let's assume you spend 2,000 rand on groceries a month, right? You've got kids' school fees that you need to pay. Let's assume you're paying 3,000 rand school fees, right? You've got everything, including the bond. So you got a bond, and we said the bond is 10,000, right? You've got all these expenses that you need to pay. And I'm saying that you now take them off your credit card or your overdraft. They literally go off of that, right? So meaning as you pay these expenses, your balance at 20,000 keeps going up. So it goes to 25, then 20, it goes up, right? So it goes up, let's say it goes up all the way to, remember I said that you're saving 6,000 rand. So you're no longer putting that 6,000 rand in a savings account or 32-day account. Because guys, I'm heavily against saving in a savings account or 32-day account or any of those bank savings accounts, because your money is essentially dead the minute you put it in there. Because think about it, logic wise, you're earning, if you're lucky, you're getting 2% interest. If you're lucky, probably getting less than that, but if you're lucky, you're getting 2%. I mean, money markets nowadays are not even giving anything more than 4%, right? So you're earning that amount, but you look at South Africa's inflation. So effectively, if you're putting your money in a bank, it's dead. You've thrown it down the drain. You are paying the bank for keeping your money, right? And then people call it an investment account. That's just a terminology, guys. You're not actually investing. You can't be investing if your money is sitting at the bank. The bank is investing your money on your behalf, and then they're lending that on to somebody else. But you're not making anything. And to put that to a test, take R1 million, do a calculation. R1 million sitting in your savings or money market account for a year, and see how much you'll be earning on that. Right? Not a lot. So I'm saying that 6,000 Rand, you now leave it in here. Meaning that, assuming now you use up the entire balance, and the only thing that's remaining is your savings, or rather, yeah, that's 6,000 Rand savings. That means this balance now will be sitting at 44,000. Why? Because you would have had to spend on your expenses 44,000. So now, do you realize that at the end of it all, the balance is reduced by 6,000. But another thing that you need to be wise about, right? These expenses that we've just covered, you're not going to pay all of them at one go, right? You're not going to pay everything along one. You're going to gradually pay them. So for instance, you're going to pay your car, let's assume you get paid on the 25th. You're going to pay your car maybe on the 27th, right? And you're going to pay your bond 2 days later. You're going to buy your groceries. So not everything's going to be spent on the same day. And why that is key is because you're taking advantage of this daily average balance situation where your balance is reducing gradually as opposed to all at once. So you want to split your expenditure as far along your timeline as possible, right? You want to make sure that you've got a higher balance for as long as possible so that you're taking advantage of the interest element, right? So now, remember, this 10,000 Rand that you just allocated here goes towards your bond limit. So this is going to be further reduced by 10K. It goes towards that. But I mean, it's only going to be reduced by the 1,000. Remember the split between interest and principal, right? So this is going to probably, the following month, when you get paid, you're going to repeat this entire cycle. Then it means, the 30,000 is going to come in here again. It's going to reduce, meaning the balance now is going to be 14,000. And then you're going to repeat this entire cycle. Everything you just went through here, you're going to repeat down here. Meaning that you're going to spend again your car, 5,000 Rand, your food, 2,000 Rand, you're going to repeat the cycle. And you're going to do this for about 8 to 9 months, right? Within 9 months, it's going to go back, it's going to replenish, and it's going to be back at 50,000 Rand again, right? So it's going to take you about, assuming you're saving 6,000 Rand here, you're leaving 6,000 Rand here, it's going to take you about 8 to 9 months, right? And it's very key, guys, that you leave something in here, because if you don't leave something in here, your credit card will never replenish. It will never go back to the same balance, right? So the idea of leaving something there is for the purposes of us bringing back the balance to 50,000 Rand, right? And the reason why I say it improves your credit score is because, remember, your credit card repayment on 50,000 Rand was probably 5,000 Rand a month, give or take, but you're paying 30,000 Rand. So for me, when the bank is looking at this and they're saying, wow, man, great, so you're a great payer. You're paying 6 times what you should be paying. Yes, you're going to be using it, but I mean, they're looking at payment received. So you're going to repeat the cycle, and then let's assume after the first 8 months, this balance is now sitting at 940, right? What's then going to happen is when it's sitting at 940 and the credit card is back at 50,000 Rand, you're going to chuck this credit card in here again. 50. Now this balance goes down to 890, right? And you're going to repeat this thing about 9 to 10 times, and your balance will eventually go back to every single time your balance goes back to 50,000 Rand, you're going to repeat it 9 to 10 times, and eventually you're going to have squashed this credit card, and that's going to take you about 5 to 7 years, right? But now here's the key thing to note, guys. Look at this. After doing this just in less than a year, in just 8 to 9 months, you have now gotten your balance to 890, which is more or less the same as what you would have done in 20 years. So remember, we said in 20 years your balance would be sitting at 880, meaning that in 20 years your credit card would only have reduced, or rather your mortgage bond balance would only have reduced by 120,000, and it would have taken you 10 years, 120 months to do this. You've just done the same thing in 8 months. In 8 months, you've just done what you would have done in 10 years essentially. Hence the concept of finishing this thing in 5 to 7 years. Because if you think about it, you've actually, just by doing this in 8 months, you've actually reduced this thing. You've cut about 9 years out of this out of the life of your home loan, right? And you realize that you can do this with your car. I done this with my car. My car was supposed to be a 5-year installment, or rather, yeah, installment credit. I paid it off in 2 years by applying this concept. You can do it with any type of installment credit, right? The concept is you basically accelerating your debt, and you're using your line of credit to accelerate your installment credit. And for me, nothing beats that. Another thing to note is that there's what you call equity, right? It would have taken you 10 years. Let's assume the market value of a property is still at $1 million. It would have taken you 10 years to make up equity of 120,000. It just took you 8 months to make equity of 110,000. So for me, a person who's an investor in property, I wanted equity because that equity helps me buy more property. It helps me leverage myself even more. And if I can do this in 8 months with just one property, imagine how many properties you can gain over a period of 10 years, you know? So this is the future for me, guys. Velocity banking, I promise you. I know it might be daunting, it might seem a little cumbersome for a lot of people seeing it for the first time, but if you've got a finance background and a numbers background, it shouldn't be too overwhelming. But drop your comments, ask me the questions, and I really don't mind taking you through it. I'll actually go as far as posting a spreadsheet. I'll send you a spreadsheet, and you can actually see the actual numbers as they're punched in, how it affects all of this, because you can see what extra payments you're paying in and how it affects. And I'll have another video where I actually take you through the differences between this model, this technique, versus the one that most people use, a traditional one where you're paying a little bit extra every single month into your bond, right? And I'll show you how much this is more effective, why it's more effective, and how much more money you'll be saving by doing this. So that brings us to the end of today's lesson, guys. Thank you a lot for joining me. Thank you for your time. I urge that you revisit the previous episode as well, where I take you through the different types of credit, because like I say, it's a 2-part series. Part 1 was last week, and this is part 2. You need to understand both parts to make sense of this. But other than that, guys, please don't forget to click the subscribe button. Let's learn together, join this journey. And yeah, man, I really enjoy this. I enjoy talking to you. I enjoy sharing this knowledge with you, and there'll be many more to come in the future. And then, yeah, other than that, this is your boy Calvin, your structured investor. Ready.